Hi.
All right. Welcome everybody to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. It is Tuesday, February 18th, and we are here with Secretary Moore of the Agency of Natural Resources to talk about H125, an act relating to reporting on the energy transition. So, Secretary, we'll go around and introduce ourselves, including the folks in the room, and then we'll turn it over to you for the record. Great. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Bennington 4.
All right, Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Cabinet Essex.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Warren, Wyndham, Windsor, Benning.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klepner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Spillian, 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
John?
Oh, John Brabant, Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
Helena Zuckerman, VNRC.
Great. Thank you for being here. All right, for the record,
I'm Julie Moore, and I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, and appreciate the invitation to come before you today to speak about H125. I want to start by honoring what I anticipate or intuit to be the intention of the bill, which is to look at indicators of how the energy transition is actually landing with Vermonters, and in trying to ensure that we are aiding and supporting Vermonters in making an energy transition statewide, and that folks, particularly in our rural areas, aren't unintentionally left behind. I think when we get down into the specifics, ANR has some potentially relevant data sets to this work that we would be happy to contribute. As an example of the kinds of data sets we have, we regularly inspect underground storage tanks in the state of Vermont, meaning we have personnel that are out at gas stations throughout the state on a periodic basis. In this instance, looking to make sure those tanks don't leak, but certainly are keeping records and even have transfers of permits for those underground storage tanks as gas stations may be changing hands. So I think we do have some very relevant information. But hoping maybe just to pull back up a little bit in reviewing much of the type of information that's laid out in H125, it seems to me that these are really lagging indicators where we would be looking at things that have already happened by virtue of the way it's structured. And so, spend some time thinking and didn't come up with much yet about leading indicators that might help us act proactively as opposed to reacting after there becomes a desert in a particular part of the state for a gas station or a fuel delivery provider. We also know from our work in other sectors that there really are kind of statewide affordability challenges that we're seeing right now. And so factors well beyond the energy transition that may be driving some of the business decisions that this set of reporting requirements would look to track. And I think it will be really important to understand what may be attributable to workforce challenges or rising healthcare costs or other factors that would cause a potentially marginal business to go out as opposed to anything about their sales changing appreciably. So those kind of economic indicators, I think, may be things we want to look at too, as sort of leading with some of the pieces in the bill really more focused currently on lagging indicators. I think, sorry, I made a bunch of notes. I want to make sure I touch on all of them. I guess I just want to make sure we're not designing fixes after the problem has already occurred, but are endeavoring to stay ahead of the challenges that this transition is inevitably going to present as there are fewer and fewer consumers for fossil fuels, and knowing that those fossil fuel elements of many of our small general stores and convenience stores are really what drive the foot traffic in to the products that make them profitable. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to actually take a step back before diving into the data collection that's sort of envisioned in the bill, or data reporting that's envisioned by the bill, to have a group of state agencies put heads together on what a set of leading indicators could look like, that would take advantage of existing reports or data sets that are already being prepared, that we could compile in a way to start to answer, I think, some of the questions that are being asked. In some ways, the administration is doing that work right now around tariffs. You may have heard the governor stood up a tariff task team to look at how tariffs could impact energy costs and could impact commerce and other cross-border activities. ANR's nexus to that is a lot of our saw logs go across the border to the north to be processed and then come back to be manufactured into value-added products. And so those two trips across the border are potentially really challenging from our perspective. But that group first is looking at what the potential effect is, and then identifying strategies to help manage and minimize those impacts. And I wonder if a similar approach couldn't be taken here, where first we could potentially recommend back to this committee next year a set of indicators that we would propose to track. And then also, as part of that reporting process, go on a going forward basis, make recommendations for ways to adjust and try to accommodate for and support gaps that we see arising as the energy transition continues.
Interesting, like thinking about the math.
Yeah, I was turning to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting concept, and I think getting agreement around what is the what is the goal of doing that, making sure that we're aligned on that. You know, what is it that we're trying to make sure we understand so that we can, I think, would be important. That's
Right.
you know, I do wonder, I wonder, and I don't mean this in any way impertinently at all, but it's a curious question. So I know that the agencies collect a lot of data, and I appreciate their quest to think about this and have some intention around it. But you do collect a lot of data. A lot of the agencies do now.
We do.
So
I guess I would, I think that that's true, right? And so to my mind, it isn't necessarily anything we would be building from whole cloth, that we would start with the existing data sets we have, but look then at how we interpret and apply them. So using the underground storage tanks again as an example, we're not collecting that to keep track of how many gas stations exist in Vermont. We are keeping track of that to make sure they have all the alarms and bells and whistles they need on their system to know if there's a leak, and to ensure that ensure at least once a year that those systems are all fully operational. So it's taking an existing data set, but then potentially repurposing it or combining it with another data set that may exist at the tax department or at the public service department to paint that more comprehensive picture and start to be able to look at the way the energy transition is playing out on the ground. And so I think we can provide, or I could commit to providing our small piece of what's in H125 right now in terms of data requests, but I'm not sure the data itself actually will answer the questions. I think it's the interpretation of the data, and then more specifically, recommendations around ways to mitigate and minimize the impacts being felt by Vermonters.
have you thought, or have you talked about this with others in the administration? Do you have some sense of who might lead that or be a part of that, or where that might best take place?
So I mean, we've created a structure in some ways that I feel like has done something along these lines with the resilience implementation strategy, right? And that was led by ANR out of the Climate Action Office. And for those not familiar with the resilience implementation strategy, the first piece of work was what we called an opportunity assessment, but we essentially asked all state agencies and some sort of state affiliates, I guess I would call them, to let us know what work they were already doing in the resilience space. And then we received over 300 program assessments that came in. And now we're working our way through them to both look at opportunities to modify programs to have them maximize their benefits for resilience and where there are gaps. And I think that same kind of opportunity assessment could be a useful approach here, where essentially you have one convening agency that puts out an all call to other agencies of state government, asking what data sets they're collecting that could be relevant to this exercise. I suspect there are data sets in tax and in labor, public service, A&R, agriculture, commerce that could all have value here. And then look at how we could assemble these, not just as kind of, I think most of what we're tracking ends up being lagging indicators just in the raw data, but how we could use that information then to project forward where areas of potential concern are likely to fall.
Are all the underground storage tanks now up to date with these monitors and so forth? Or are there some underground storage tanks that are not?
I will need to get back to you on that. I believe at this point we have completed that work, that the last phase of that effort completed about 3 years ago, but I want to confirm that and make sure.
Brooke Campbell?
Yeah, see your point about underground storage tanks and gas pumps driving traffic for small general stores struck a note with me, and I'm imagining that it wouldn't be hard to. You probably know where every underground storage tank is.
From date forward, there are some old ones that often surprise us when we're digging.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think.
You still find some that you didn't know about.
Yeah, I think V-Trans could actually probably tell you a number of unexpected things they've encountered while digging.
Interesting. Okay, well, you know where all the ones are from a certain date.
Correct. I would say for all the ones in the last 40 years are certainly in our records and probably longer.
Okay. And nobody's delivering a fuel to a tank that you don't know about. I mean, there must be some regulation about that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
But they may not. The ones, what we often find are ones that were not properly closed out and simply left empty, or in some cases with some product in them.
Right.
When the site was abandoned.
Yeah. Anyway, what I'm getting at is you have that data, and then there's also data about the sales from small general stores.
Correct.
And putting those things together, and maybe the sales trajectory of the stores, maybe putting that information together with geographical information and maybe housing information would yield some of this synthesis that you're talking about, which sounds like it would be an exciting way to get a handle on leading indicators, basically, on where things are sort of coming apart and interventions might be focused. Right?
That is what I would propose. That's sort of building on the idea that's represented in H125 and hopefully helping it kind of go that next step to become actionable as opposed to just reflective.
Yeah, that sounds like a great suggestion to me. Thank you.
Brooke Lepner?
So, Secretary Moore, you and I have discussed this briefly in the past, and I have raised this concern, but I am wondering if we have current thoughts about what happens when a home or a group of homes that heat with heating oil find that there are no distributors willing to deliver to their homes. I don't know that that's happened yet.
I have not heard that it has.
But it feels like it could at some point, as fewer people in that area heat with heating oil and it becomes unviable and the distributor there retires and the next person takes over some of it, but there are a few houses that are just too far out. Representative Southworth looks skeptical that a house would be left orphaned.
I don't think, this is just my opinion, but a company isn't going to just up and leave and then that person can't be serviced. I mean, I think there are enough distributors in the state that somebody's going to pick it up, whether it's going to be timely for a delivery, that'd be another question. But I do believe that there's very little chance that somebody would be left unserviced.
For Alan?
So in general, it's my belief that gasoline is stored below ground, but fuel oil is above ground storage. And fuel oil, I think, when I drive by, I see retaining wall or capture pits, if you will.
Secondary containers.
Okay, thank you. And so the gas stations that go out of business, I just read that a New York company took over a large number of convenience stores.
Mhm.
And in my experience, the oil company that was providing some of the stores got in a hassle with a convenience store that tried to switch brands, if you will, in the interim of a contract. And so the reason for gas stations to close is predominantly they're looking at multiple revenue sources, groceries, other things, and that fuel alone isn't enough to keep a mom and pop store open.
That is consistent with my understanding, but certainly not an area where I have any particularized expertise.
Well, it doesn't take a lot of observation to notice that there are stores that come through the small villages and only sell at discount rates of groceries. It's tough to compete. Buying only a case of spaghetti sauce at a time rather than a pallet loader.
So just to refocus back on H125 and the data sets that ANR has and your thoughts on the bill. I'm interested in the idea of the lagging versus leading indicators. I think that could be very useful work. And I'm also interested in not waiting a year to hear back on what you think the leading, what these leading indicators might be. I'm more interested in seeing a first report, even if it's imperfect, as we're envisioning this coming December, so that the legislature has a chance to take a look at it and act on it, and then maybe take some testimony on whatever you guys have come up with on. So it's sort of like, we're going to get started. We know it's not perfect. Here's all the data we have available. We're not looking to task anybody with gathering new data that doesn't exist. I think we're interested in tapping available data. And for myself, I think I'd be very interested in just seeing, we could even call it a draft, next December, like, here's the data we've got. How does this look to you guys? What do you think? We've been putting our heads together on some leading indicators so that next year's iteration is that much better. So I'm not sure if that was a question or more of a thought.
Can I reflect back what I think I'm hearing you say?
Yeah.
Is that we would report back in December, focusing on kind of an inventory of available data sets that are in this space that could be useful to these conversations. And then a set of recommendations around the analyses we would propose to undertake to sort of get at those leading indicators, and then could engage in the conversation with this committee about whether or not those are the right data points and or analysis approaches to meet the questions you all have. And essentially then the year 2 report would be much more complete, but that way we're bringing you this initial, here's the data we have, here are different ways we believe we could slice and dice it to start to provide a set of indicators to be tracked over time.
That is what I said. You did reflect it back.
Good.
But it just feels more substantive to me than, we'll get a task force going and get back. I would like to start really, the thing that I find so interesting about this bill is how promising it could be, and we're still trying to make it take shape.
Mhm.
And so having something that this exact same group of people could work on next year, so that it doesn't all kind of wait until some future legislature to take up or not take up. That's where I'm coming from, I think. Rep. Sibilia, what do you think?
One a question for you and then one for Secretary Moore. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you saying let's proceed in an imperfect way and also as Secretary Moore is suggesting, ask for these leading indicators?
Yep, that is what I'm saying.
I said that less substantively than Secretary Moore or.
And
Second
My
question,
apologies.
yeah. Just in terms of leading indicators, one of the things that I'm really worried about, and I think I may have said this the last time you were here, thanks for all your thinking on this since then. I always go back to the phones. And, how could we have known that was going to happen with the copper landlines? And, what are the leading indicators? I think the leading indicators there, one that I would point to is we have places in Vermont where there's competition in an unregulated industry and places in Vermont where there's not. And, there are places where there's not competition that are really rural and have a sector that's in transition. That feels like, how do we quantify that, as the leading indicator? That's what I'm worried about.
Right. As an indicator of risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's other places. We have just an inequity in how the market is working. Yeah. And that's just reality. I mean, you're not going to have competition in a place where there's a lot less people. It's just not going to happen. There's not enough there for companies to compete.
Well,
And maybe another way of posing the question or concern I had earlier. If we assemble a great set of leading indicators and they suggest to us there is a likelihood that a certain area will have, say, a fuel desert, how is that actionable for us? Like, what can we imagine the state doing to ensure that those people continue to have access to the fuel they need?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that's probably where the next round of discussion would need to come. I imagine, like in other areas where we are trying to promote certain types of businesses or activities, the state could consider offering incentives or other tools that help subsidize the cost of the operation. But to me, I think the first step would be to identify those areas of risk or concern and then start to look at what are the strategies that could be used to mitigate that risk.
I have a question about that and what they're talking about. Does anybody have information about the service territory of, let's say, heating fuel companies, either fuel oil or propane or both? Is that something that fuel dealers, first of all, provide? Is that information they provide, and is it information they commit to? Does anybody know?
I don't know. Fuel dealers have been largely unregulated up until some of the reporting obligations under the Clean Heat Standard. So really, prior to the Clean Heat Standard, and I would say still our only comprehensive record of fuel dealers, or more comprehensive record, is with the tax department, because they do have to file tax report forms.
Okay, but then they wouldn't be indicating their service areas in that.
I don't believe so, but I can't speak to the full reporting obligations they have with the tax department.
And how about for the Clean Heat Standard? But that's for the PUC. You probably don't know that either.
Correct. Just that it exists and that they believe it's currently incomplete. Matt Coda with the Fuel Dealers Association could also be someone to ask that question of. He may actually have the best information along.
Actually, might. That's right. Okay.
Rep. Torrey?
Yeah, I have a data question and I'm remembering back to last session and the other committee. We got to see a lot of you. There was a program with tagged fuel tanks,
Yes,
and you could kind of prioritize those people
yes,
for electrification benefits.
yes.
Is there data that goes along with that? All the is that a data set you have?
It is a data set we have for folks' awareness, we ran an initiative over a period of about 6 years that culminated, I think, last year or the year before, which put an obligation on fuel dealers to inspect home heating fuel tanks before they delivered to them. And if they were found to be substandard, and we had a whole bunch of criteria by what substandard meant, they were red tagged, and it meant they weren't able to receive a delivery, or the fuel dealers had some limited flexibility for best professional judgment to make a minimum fuel delivery just so people don't go cold. We had a grant program that went hand in glove with this Red Tag Tanks program to provide financial assistance to homeowners who had tanks that were red tagged and met certain income eligibility requirements. We came in, I don't remember if it was last session or the first half of the last biennium, but with a request for some additional flexibility to say, if we're going to provide a grant of $2,500 to a homeowner to replace their fuel tank, can we also offer them the opportunity to, instead of reinvesting in their fossil fuel heating system, to make an investment in a clean energy technology? And I think we had a handful of takers. It wasn't as many as I would have hoped. I think part of the challenge is a lot of those issues sort of come to light at this time of year when people are like, I just want my heat back on.
Whatever's quickest.
Correct. And I think we saw some of that, frankly, following the July 23 floods. We partnered with Efficiency Vermont to make incentives available to flood impacted property owners to replace, when they had to replace their heating system anyways, to ideally do it again with a clean energy technology. And again, I think they just wanted to, whatever was fastest. So it didn't have a high level of success, but I think it's a good idea, and certainly something to look for, where we have those points of leverage and can hopefully make it easier for folks to transition. And to me, that might be some of the strategies that come out of this, kind of in response to what you'd asked Representative Putner. Yeah.
So, my question is, how are you gonna be able to tell me that a store down in, or you're gonna be able to relay information to reps about one of the stores in her town that has an underground tank, like that store went out of business? Isn't that like after the fact?
It is.
And do they, well, and then do they need to pull that tank if they're out of business, if they can't,
Yeah.
come back in with somebody else?
I think there are a set of obligations, or at least it remains a going financial commitment to address that tank if the business is really done, as opposed to they're hoping to sell it and somebody else would like to open it and use the fuel tank. And I agree, it is that is a lagging indicator. I think the leading indicator could be looking to see if there are patterns of areas of the state, perhaps, where gas stations are going out of business at a higher rate than other areas, right? And use that information to determine if we're likely to end up with fuel deserts, or I'm not sure what the right term is. I just know we use the term food deserts.
Yeah.
So it seems like it works.
Great.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well, as I said in the other committee meeting last week, that, and following up with Mike, Representative Southworth's thought, that when I came down there to come to work, there's Fred's Energy, thinking I was going to lose him in Elmore, and I didn't. I said, oh, maybe I'm going to lose the truck in Worcester, right down to Montpelier, and he traveled from Morrisville. So I'm thinking that this concern about not being able to find fuels, I mean, that truck's traveling 30 miles to come in. He must have delivered somebody down here in this neck of the woods. So I understand there's fuel dealers on the Massachusetts border that would come across to help service your area if local people went out. So I'm just a little quite confused what we're going to get out of this.
it seems like if there are fewer dealers serving an area, then there's less competition. If there's less competition, then there's less price competition as well. And somebody might be willing to bring you fuel, but it might be at a higher price and at much less frequent delivery schedule. Yeah. So it just makes it more difficult for somebody to get along. So maybe it's not a desert, but it's awfully dry.
Okay, let's quickly, and then we need to stay on time.
Yeah.
And make sure we're asking questions and not getting into committee discussion. We remember the speakers,
Yes.
the speaker's guidance.
Do you happen to know if there are areas of the state in which gas stations are closing more rapidly than new ones are opening right at the moment?
I don't.
Yeah.
Do you have data on which ones have closed in the last? Oops, so either you or Ag would have that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm not sure if there's a singular repository for it. If people remove their fuel tanks, we would have records of that. But if the fuel tanks were sort of left in place while the station was for sale, even if it wasn't currently operational, I don't believe we would have a record of that.
Another question. Sorry. Oh, yes. But I know I am aware of several that have closed in more populated parts of southern Vermont and programs around rehabbing those spaces. So that would be where the tank situation would come into play.
Right.
That's where you would probably know.
Correct.
So,
And to Representative Holland's first question, there were a number of gas stations that went out of business as they sort of knew there was a deadline looming in terms of our modern requirements for underground storage tanks. And they sort of ran up until they would have had to replace their tanks and then went out of business. So I want to say that was 2022, but I could be mistaken. I can get that date for you, but there was this sort of, folks knew that was going to be the end of the line for them. They didn't anticipate being in business long enough to pay back whatever the investment would have been required in that tank, but I can get those dates for you.
thank you.
Great. Secretary Moore, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Would it be helpful if I sort of worked with some of my colleagues from the other relevant agencies and kind of proposed back to you something that looks like the report that was described or discussed here that could potentially then be provided back to us as direction to do the work?
It would be great to work with you on this.
Okay.
I think that could only be helpful.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
When would you like to have that by?
So, we have a crossover challenge.
Yeah.
What is Crescent?
March 14th. So,
Would a week from today be sufficient?
is that doable? I mean, I don't want to set your hair on fire.
No, I mean, we've had a couple of sort of one-on-one conversations. I think it's getting all the right people in the room, but I think we could do that within a week.
A week from today would be great because that gives us another full week. You know, if the committee's liking the bill and we're going to vote it out, we need to vote it out. And my hope had been that if we've got any bills we're sending to the floor, I had this delusion that we might get them to the floor before town meeting break. But maybe it's not delusional.
We're going to do good work, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So that would be great. And as Rep. Sebeli said, it'd be great to work with you guys on this because I think we share the same vision here.
Yeah, and we want to produce a report that's informative and usable,
Yeah.
as opposed to just a recitation of existing data sets.
Right.
So yeah, I think we share the same goal and appreciate the opportunity to make some suggestions.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary Moore, for being here.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we can just forge ahead.
Take care.
With our next esteemed witness.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you all again. Thank you for having me. I want to make sure that I've got my technology set up first.
Great. And let us know when you're ready to do the whole, for the record thing.
Great. Jack, can you help me just make sure that when I share screen, you're seeing? Go back
Yep.
to
So-
You're up.
go back. Well,
I think it's 5.
Okay, yeah, let me just go this. Yeah. Um, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Jared Duval. I serve as Executive Director of Energy Action Network. Additionally and separately, I'm also an appointed member of the Vermont Climate Council. And as I mentioned before, I just always want to be clear that there's an important distinction there in that as an appointed member of the Climate Council, I'm legislatively required to participate in making policy recommendations. However, in my job with Energy Action Network, we do not engage in any lobbying, and so I do not make policy recommendations on behalf of the Energy Action Network, the nonprofit organization, or our network of members. So if, to the extent that a conversation would veer into a policy conversation, I would only participate in that in my capacity as a member of the council. But my primary intent today is to share with you some data resources that Energy Action Network has developed, if that's helpful.
Super.
Proceed?
Yes, proceed.
Thank you so much. So as many of you know, Energy Action Network does data tracking, research, and analysis on behalf of the state of Vermont. We act as an independent, nonpartisan data tracker and analyst, and we work with many partners and many data providers, from the federal government to the state government to local government and utilities. And one of the key resources that you're already familiar with is our annual progress report for Vermont. And that, has been published for over a decade. And we look at emissions, energy use, energy costs, economic and equity considerations around affordability. But in addition to that, that's both a printed document that exists as Representative Bailey has right there, and it also exists online as a PDF. But in addition to that, we've developed a number of interactive data tracking tools, an energy dashboard and a greenhouse gas emissions tracking dashboard. And when I heard about the effort to understand Vermont's energy transition, the economic transition that's underway in our energy sectors, I thought that this energy dashboard we have could provide some interesting lenses of analysis for how different energy technologies are experiencing different rates of uptake across the state. So just a little bit of background on the Vermont Energy Dashboard. It was first published in its current form in 2024. We are very reliant on and very grateful to data providers, including Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric Department, VGS, and the state weatherization programs. And this is a simplified dashboard. We used to have an older dashboard that was much more complicated, but after the publication of Vermont's Climate Action Plan in 2021, we said, let's look at those 4 highest impact measures that do the most to reduce pollution and often do the most to reduce energy costs. So weatherization, heat pump water heaters, heat pumps, and electric vehicles. So those are the 4 key energy kind of measures or energy technologies that we track statewide on this dashboard. Slide. So these are some screenshots, and I'm actually going to, in a minute, do a kind of a live demo and hope that works. But in case it doesn't, here are some screenshots. You start up top, and you choose a filter, either in the green, you see up here, town, county, or regional planning commission. And that'll allow you to kind of choose the geographic lens of analysis. And then you can choose the measure. So looking at cold climate heat pump adoption, heat pump water heaters, weatherization, or electric vehicles. And we're able to track this because of upstream rebate data that utilities provide to Vermonters when they undertake these different activities. And so we can then look at that by town, by county, by regional planning commission. We can also look at it over time to see the statewide pace of adoption. And these graphs are a little small. I'll zoom in on each of them more specifically, but the one in the upper right, this is an example of cold climate heat pumps, and you can see the significant ramp up in adoption. Nearly 60,000 cold climate heat pumps installed as of 2023, when there were, just over 1,000 8 years ago. So significant increases here. And then in the lower right, we put each of these where we stand as of the latest data. Our current statewide data only goes through 2023. We'll be updating. We'll have 2024 data this summer. But we graph that relative to the targets for each of those technologies in the pathways analysis that was an underpinning of Vermont's climate action plan. So if we were to meet the emissions reduction obligations in line with the modeling that was done for the climate action plan, these are some reference points for the adoption levels that we would want to see. They're not, carved in stone prescriptive. If you do less on one measure, you could make up that emissions reduction by doing more in another, but they're helpful reference points. So already discussed this. These are the 4 key energy transition measures or technologies that we're tracking on our energy dashboard. And here are some examples of the different ways to view weatherization that's happening. So
I'm sorry, I did
yes.
have a question. Sorry, going back, you said you're tracking that by the uptake on incentives and rebates.
Yes.
So folks who are just paying for it on their own would not be captured in your data.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
thanks.
So there is a note on the methodology that says that these are likely conservative estimates, but after conversations with the utilities, including Efficiency Vermont, we think that this is the vast majority, over 90%, because these rebates happen upstream, oftentimes at the installer level.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So these are just examples of seeing weatherization. And this is presented in a heat map format. So the darker colors show greater levels. Oftentimes you'll see this kind of per capita. We did by per housing unit, which works better oftentimes to look at the relative adoption rates of things like weatherization and heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. So this is per housing unit. So you can see that, weatherization by county, counties like Washington and Rutland are seeing a lot of weatherization relative to other counties, while counties like Windsor and Grand Isle are seeing a little bit less per housing unit. But we can also look at the overall numbers. So you see, so this is if we clicked just on Washington County, you can see the pace of adoption in that county and relative to the statewide targets as well. But we can do this for any county. These are the statewide numbers that give the aggregate or the cumulative totals over time. So this is weatherization. We're seeing 2,000 to 2,500 homes comprehensively weatherized each year. This is cold climate heat pumps. And this is heat pump water heaters. And this is electric vehicles broken down by all electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. That number is already out of date. We're already over 15,000 EVs as of last summer.
Rep Troy and then Rep Campbell.
So on the EVs, you can get that on the town level? That slide you have there?
Yes. And that is thanks to data that we get from Drive Electric Vermont that originally comes from the Department of Motor Vehicles based on registration, vehicle registration data.
And the weatherization data comes from the WAP program and EBT and PGF, I guess.
Yes,
and
and VPD and Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah. Okay.
Including, yes, through the Office of Economic Opportunity for the Weatherization Assistance Program and 3E Thermal as well, aggregating all of those weatherization projects together. And that data is also reported to the Public Service Department. So let's go ahead and just do a quick interactive with this. And if it's okay, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I'd ask any committee member who wants to look at a town or a county that they represent.
Oh, fun. Okay. Our next
Moretown.
witness is until 3, so Moretown. Moretown got first
We're
in
working
line.
on our energy plan right now.
Okay, so-
this is where-
You only represent Moretown? or-
No, but that's the town. I thought I could.
Okay.
I am going to already off video. Okay, so we're selecting town, and we're gonna go to Moortown. It's right there. And
We
so,
went straight to Moretown. That was
impressive.
impressive. Yeah.
How's this shape?
Yeah.
This is geography.
and is there a particular measure or,
All of them.
okay, so let's start with weatherization. And it's gonna update, we'll see on the right-hand side, the pace of adoption. And so 100, comprehensive weatherization projects have happened in Moortown to date.
So only 5 between those 2 years.
That's right. But we can also look at heat pump water heaters. We'll just expect to update. Sometimes.
What do you figure the population of Moretown, excuse me, the housing units in Moretown?
No, off the top of my head.
And so 78 heat pump water heaters. We can also, unclick town and, see how looks like fairly average in terms of the adoption, compared to statewide.
How about 2 votes for Wardsboro?
Okay.
See if
2 votes for Moretown. Oh, right. Okay.
Okay, help me out. I know
Yeah.
I'm southwest.
Go
Southeast,
right.
southeast.
Yeah.
There we go.
Central,
There you go.
actually. There you go.
There it is.
Wardsboro's been doing some work.
Yeah, 52 weatherization projects.
That's pretty much every house.
It is not.
Heat pump water heaters.
This is a very cool dashboard.
Have you thought about putting in
Brett
the
Bailey?
percentage, the weatherization's income based on income, correct?
Then it's a combination. It does include the income qualified weatherization assistance program, but this would also include comprehensive weatherization projects that happen get incentives that are more market rate. It's a combination of both.
Okay.
We see it as a percentage of the units in that geographic region, so you kind of get a better sense of uptake per household or something like that.
So we show here, if you hover, the electric, so we're on electric vehicles now, electric vehicles per housing unit. And so there's 17 registered in Wardsboro. So that's, what is that?
1,700 households, right?
That many?
I mean, it's
It's
showing, it's showing
0.01%. So
yeah.
Yeah.
relatively low rate of uptake as compared to some of these darker colors towns where we're seeing higher rates of adoption, including.
So interesting thing to think about here. Wardsboro does have a number of second homes and camps.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure.
I don't know if other committee members want to test their town.
I can see mine. I can see my little 4 squares from here. And, they're not surprising to me. The color schemes. I'm to the left. Jared, up to the left, up. There you go. Nope, sorry, down. And there you go. So I've got those little four squares, Manchester, and then to the left is Sandgate. And then down is Arlington, and then I've got Sunderland. And just seeing from here, the colors are about what I would expect. Slightly darker, higher uptake in Manchester, which has a little bit of a probably higher income than the other communities that I represent. So folks are able to afford to do that work on their own a little bit more.
It's interesting though, because while I agree with what you're saying when it comes to electric vehicles and heat pumps and heat pump water heaters,
But now
the
the
weatherization
weatherization is the
follows a
opposite.
different pattern. And oftentimes we see lower income counties and towns in the state have higher rates of per capita weatherization. And I think that that is a reflection of the funds that are put towards the weatherization assistance program and the programs that exist to specifically support lower income towns and regions of
Can you
the
scroll
state.
just a little bit? I want to see my little colors. There you go. Oh, that is really interesting. That is exactly what you just
Look at that,
said.
both people in Glassberry.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, yeah.
And you can see it
Glassberry.
even
You
more.
mean the
but,
person
yeah.
in Glassberry?
Well,
No, I'm
that's it.
kidding.
Yeah, well, I had two. Does anybody have a feel for the density of renters in Wardsboro or Dover versus the homeowners? So that if you're looking at homes that are owned by people with low income, they'd have more of a propensity than the city of Rutland, where the renters are in multi unit homes and the landlord hasn't partaken or hasn't recorded that he's partaken. Obviously, it's in his interest to weatherize, but we don't have a count on like multi-unit homes, houses that have multi-units or.
Those are included in here. So this is housing units. Yeah. So
So if there's
including
four apartments at 4 housing units, if that building weatherized.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
So I have a question. So I'm thinking about the energy burden report.
Yeah.
Which I believe is self-reported.
From Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah.
My recollection is that they use census data, and they are primarily looking at to understand to break down the kind of geographic distribution of income, and then I would have to go back to look at the report, but I believe that a large portion of it is U.S. Census data at the community level.
But I think individual residents report what they spent on it.
Yes,
That's
into the American Community Survey
Okay.
via the U.S. Census.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, there are a bunch of these. This is really cool. That is also, I find, to be an interesting tool for thinking about, where is affordability a real issue that folks are struggling with, yeah, I'm just wondering about how, I think the data the concern that I'm having is around market shift.
Yeah.
And so how these can, are we collecting all of the data to help us with market shift?
And I think that there is additional data that could and should be collected to help get a broader picture of that market shift in the economic transition you're talking about. I'm also happy to share some of the additional resources beyond this. This energy dashboard is just one piece of the data tracking that we do, but I wanted to share this because it is kind of uniquely interactive and geography specific, in case that's of interest. We also track primarily from the tax department. They report data on gasoline and diesel sales, as well as heating fuel sales, especially fuel oil, kerosene, and propane. And so we're able to look at So this is a combination of all fossil fuel spending on transportation fuels and heating fuels over $2 billion. You add these two numbers together, over $2 billion in 2023. And so we're able to track that information as well as electricity spending. EIA and then either the Public Service Department or VTrans have data available on tracking gasoline and diesel prices, and then the utilities report their retail electricity prices as well as their EV rates.
Sorry. EIA.
Energy Information Administration.
Federal.
Yes.
Do they still have workers? Tracking data.
And then we can see the same thing on the heating fuel side.
Would you go back to your, that GMP, $1.20 a gallon is there? That's the bottom line, the
That's-
EV rate?
Yes, in a per gallon equivalent.
So the line is the meld of all those utility, or those two, I just see two.
Yeah, so this would be the statewide average retail rate. That's not an EV specific rate, is this line. These dots are the specific EV rates offered by Green Mountain Power.
At this point in time.
Yes, and that's a great point. We are planning to, and we should, show those as lines over time because those EV rate programs have existed for a number of years. So rather than just showing the latest price, show what those EV rates were over the last number of years since they've existed. We're going to add that.
So that's taking what I pay to charge my car and translating it into what I would be paying at the pump.
If you're charging on the EV rate, which
Right.
is like the cold water, cold water heater, people call them hot water, but they heated cold water. And it's an off-peak rate, and I just got a constituent issue on that, and Green Mountain Power's rate was 14 plus cents, and we're just a penny shy of 20 cents or hundreds of cents shy of 20 cents on the regular daily rate, not including the energy efficiency add-on charge.
So our price tracking converts electricity prices into a per gallon equivalent just to make it more understandable and accessible, but using the same
with some assumption of efficiency on the EV, mountainous territory versus Champlain Valley, if you will.
And this is the price tracking for heating fuel sources. And then we also have data, and it starts, I believe we originally thought it only went back to 2018, but we've since learned it goes back to 2017, data from the tax department on heating fuel sales. And we produced a report on this last year that we're going to update this year. We're going to add analysis of our transportation fuel sales statewide. But you can see that heating fuel sales have, using 2018 as the starting point, that we thought that's when the data started. It actually goes back a year earlier, but using 2018 as a baseline, we've seen heating fuel sales decline a little over 12%, which is more than you would expect based on the decline in heating degree days over that period. And so we dig into that analysis and try to estimate what share of that decline may be as a result of the installation of cold climate heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and additional weatherization. But this is an encouraging sign that we're seeing heating fuel sales decouple from the heating degree day line. It used to always be that our heating fuel sales moved in line with how warm or cold the winter is. Now, heating fuel sales are declining even faster than you would expect with a decline in heating degree days.
You have a combined heating with propane or natural gas, and this is statewide.
Yeah, so this is combined in billions of British thermal units. So it combines fuel oil, kerosene, propane, and fossil gas into one total heating fuel sales number.
Thank you.
And those, it's interesting, those different fuels are declining at different rates. So we're seeing fuel oil sales decline much more significantly than propane or fossil gas.
But it's all in BTUs, it's not in dollars, so.
Right.
But he's gonna get their BTUs somehow, whether they.
Representative Morrow is in front of you.
I'm not sure what your purview was here today, if you're just here to show us what you have, but did you get a chance to look at the bill at all and have any comments specifically about?
I have some questions and some observations at the end. I just wanted to make sure.
Whenever you want to get to it.
So we also look at the energy transition in terms of through a consumer level, comparing different equipment choices. So this is an example of an average gas vehicle versus a comparable electric vehicle. Savings vary based on how much you're driving. So high gasoline users can save more by switching to an EV than a typical gasoline user. We do illustrations, examples, taking illustrative households, looking at before and after different energy choices.
Yeah.
We look at, yes.
Sorry, Jared, and we've got time, so I want to make sure we understand the slides that you're presenting to us today. So, Representative Seville, you had a question, I think, on one of your slides? Yeah.
Previous slide. So, and this is information collected from Department of Taxes. And so, do you have any sense, and we certainly could talk with Department of Taxes and maybe Mr. Coda, but do you have any sense of if that data can be down or help us understand what's happening in specific areas of the state? I know that's like the aggregate.
Yeah.
Is there any geographic?
That's been a long-standing challenge in the energy and data communities, is that, well, it's possible to get the statewide aggregate data. We have very limited understanding of fuel sales at a more of a granular regional level. I know that there is some additional reporting that's available as a result of the fuel dealer registration that accompanied the Affordable Heat Act. So I think that that's an important question, is if there is a desire to be able to look at a more granular level than the statewide level. I'm not sure that the current data reporting that exists allows for that.
Thank you.
Please, I wanted to get right to what Representative Morrow was leading me to, which is the questions and observations related to the bill in question. But if there are any questions on any of this, please make a stop. So we're also looking at energy spending by income level. And what we see consistently is that while upper income Vermonters use more energy and they spend more on energy, because their incomes are so much higher than lower and middle income Vermonters, the energy burden or the share of household income that is spent by lower income Vermonters is much higher. So you see this orange bar, folks, 0 to 60% of area median income, on average 19% of combined household heating and electricity costs, 19% of their budget, even though they're spending less on that energy than upper income folks. So looking at energy spending as a share of income and also reported energy spending by income group. That's on this is an artifact of the data source that we have. This is from the U.S. Community Survey, American Community Survey, and they combine heating and electricity fuel expenditures. This is gasoline spending from a different data source, but it looks at this compares different types of gasoline users and how much of their income goes to spending on gasoline. So that was just to set context of we are doing a lot of data tracking, reporting, and analysis that may be of interest and useful to you, but specific to the bill in question, here are some questions I have. I believe that the first two pieces of data that the bill points to are the number of sellers in terms of gasoline stations and fuel dealers. And I had a question of whether it was just the number of sellers that was of interest or also the volume of fuel sold and the number of employees in each energy sector. And we have that data statewide in terms of the volume of fuel sold from the tax department. So that could be incorporated in, and we have the number of employees statewide from the Clean Energy Industry Report that's produced by the Clean Energy Development Fund, which is housed out of the Public Service Department.
Jared, is it your understanding that tax would be able and willing to share that information, or is that something that would require legislative direction?
So when I have requested data from them on an aggregate statewide level,
Right.
it's always been provided in the fuel gross receipts data. I think if there was a desire to see it at a more granular level, by county or by town, that I have never been aware of that being provided.
Okay.
My recollection is that there are confidentiality concerns, that there are some towns in which
There's only one dealer or.
but I think there are ways to aggregate it, but that would be not a question that I could answer, and I would defer to them. But
No, that's
at a
great.
statewide level, the data is there.
Good.
And then we get, fossil gas data directly from, or also known as natural gas, from VGS. So these are just some of the key data sources that we rely on and that I think would be relevant to being incorporated into the comprehensive view you're trying to take to the energy transition underway. Additional questions and observations. I believe that there was a piece of the draft bill that was looking at energy spending on electricity and electricity rates, but I think it's helpful to take an all fuels or all energy approach. So looking at total spending on fossil fuels in transportation, gasoline and diesel, on the heating side, fuel oil, kerosene, propane, fossil gas as well, so that those things can be compared. Because, stop there. Fuel oil, kerosene, and propane prices are tracked by the Public Service Department. They have a really helpful website, and that data can be downloaded. They do a survey of different fuel dealers in collaboration with EIA. PSC is also reporting gasoline prices. This is on a monthly basis. And we get diesel prices from VTrans. One hole in the data that has been difficult, that we've run into challenges, we often want to do cost comparisons for Vermonters of different energy choices. And to do that, we have to rely on historic prices and also going forward price forecasts. And a lot of the fossil fuel data is available from EIA. But a big gap is wood price data. So there are states around us, including New Hampshire and Maine and New York, that track wood fuel prices. And Vermont used to do that, but that's no longer happening. So we don't have average prices for cordwood, wood chips, or wood pellets, which makes it difficult to compare those prices to their alternatives, to look at how stable or volatile they are, and to do kind of consumer economic savings opportunities analysis. You can see that in this graph here, where you see this line for wood chips, it stops here, wood pellets stops here, because that data stopped being collected and reported. And as a data analyst, I'm always somebody who wants to look at things holistically and look at all fuels or total energy analysis. So that would be my question for you, are you just interested in electric rates, or are you also interested in tracking prices of these other fuels. And I just want to note that right now there's this key gap in the data. Most of that data exists somewhere in the state and it could be compiled into one report. We're doing part of it in our annual progress report, but the big gap or a big gap is on wood prices.
We have Rep Campbell and then Rep Sibilia. Okay.
So how can wood prices be collected? Is it a matter of calling dealers and asking them their prices?
Yeah, similar
Very
to
laborious.
what's done with fuel delivered fuel dealers for fuel oil and propane. It's a survey, and you pick a sample size. That's my understanding based on the description. I mean, of course, I would defer to and recommend testimony from PSD, VTrans, the tax department in terms of, I'm just sharing the data that we're aware of and have utilized when we're trying to do economic tracking and analysis. But my understanding from the way that they describe their data collection efforts is that the fuel prices that PSD tracks for fuel oil, kerosene, and propane are based on a survey, and that's how wood fuel prices had historically been tracked and would be going forward, presumably, if that was to begin again.
And do you know why they stopped tracking it?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I think that was Rep Sibilia's question.
Yeah.
That's it. Those were just some questions and observations after reading the initial draft.
Actually, I have
Really
one question.
helpful. Yeah, and then I have a.
So, I don't know if you heard Secretary Moore's testimony.
I'm sorry, I think that's just the last couple of minutes.
She was talking about the fact that a lot of the data points that we were talking about here are lagging indicators,
Yes.
and the administration is thinking about, what are leading indicators.
Yeah.
But it would seem to me, and I whispered this to the chair, that the fuel sales decline would be leading.
Definitely. And I think, so one of
There
the,
are others that you could.
right. One of the challenges in terms of greenhouse gas emissions tracking has always been that for the state greenhouse gas inventory, the Agency of Natural Resources, when they compile that, are relying on state inventory tools provided by the Environmental Protection Agency. And the module, the tool to estimate agricultural sector emissions is on a 3-year delay. So, we're last year in 2024, we got an inventory that went through 2021. And so there was that 3-year delay. But that's largely a function of the delay in the ag sector emissions estimate. When it comes to the vast majority of our fuel sales and therefore emissions, it doesn't have to be that long of a delay. It's really a matter of months. So earlier this month, the tax department, when I reached out, let me know that they now have estimated total fuel sales data for 2024 as of February 2025. And so we can know about 70% of statewide greenhouse gas emissions, with not a 3-year delay, but on a month or two delay. Not the whole emissions picture, but the vast majority of it is available in not quite real time, but a matter of months lag time rather than years.
Rep Campbell.
And does that data include number of gallons sold, the quantity, not just dollars?
That's right.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. And that was my understanding, and I want to defer to the tax department on this, but my understanding is that previously they had just recorded and reported on total tax revenues.
So dollars,
and now you can see total gallons sold as well, because you can't intuit one from the other without knowing, because the prices are always fluctuating, right? So
kind of volatile.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but my understanding is that at least since 2017, we have total fuel sales volumes in terms of gallons or therms, and we have revenues.
2017, you said.
That's my understanding. And I think that that's a big reason why it used to be that the Agency of Natural Resources relied on EPA state inventory tools that were estimates of statewide fuel use based on, for instance, vehicle miles traveled estimates as a way to arrive at a statewide estimate. Now, with this tax department data, they've switched to the tax department data because it's a much more direct and high confidence data source, because they're having to those fuel sellers are having to report every gallon sold in the state of Vermont.
Okay, could I just have one more question about that? So that includes gasoline, heating oil, propane, and natural gas, 100 CCS, or however they would count it.
BCF, yeah.
BCF.
Yes, they're tracked in different ways. So my understanding of the gasoline and diesel data is based on the gas tax, and that is, while it's my understanding, and I could get this wrong, but my understanding is that while that's collected by the tax department, the most accessible way to get that data is through JFO, and JFO has the gasoline and diesel sales data by month and annually. And my understanding is that's what's used as an input to transportation sector emissions accounting.
And that's a per gallon tax, or at least some of it's a per gallon tax.
Correct. Right. And then on the heating fuel side, that data is in the fuel gross receipts tax.
Which is also per gallon.
And so we're able to track the gallons, but they're coming from different data tracking sources. Okay. Or the reason why they're collected is slightly different taxes or fees, but they can get aggregated up into total statewide gallons sold.
And what else would there be? I mean, well, we don't collect wood pellet information, for example, anymore. Kilowatt hours or megawatt hours. I guess that information would exist somewhere also.
My understanding is that is available through the public service department from the reporting that they require of utilities annually.
Yeah. Pulling all these threads together.
I know. Rep Morrow.
Can I just ask that you send this to Jack so we can look through some of the
Yes,
slides?
apologies that I did not send it
No
before.
worries.
That's right.
Go
That's
back to
not
a couple of slides.
Yeah,
My leisure.
our assistant will always reach out to folks and make sure that they submit their written testimony so that we can go back to it. Yep. Rep Sibilia?
Nope, I think this was really helpful. Yeah, I think this was really helpful, and I appreciate the questions / suggestions at the end also.
Yeah. Rep Torrey?
Yeah, just a question for you as a data guru. Does this proposed report and tracking seem like a real gap to you?
I think that there are certainly some currently existing gaps. I'm not aware. It's not that it doesn't exist. I haven't seen data on a number of the things that are requested in the draft bill. And there are some things that used to exist that no longer exist that I do think are really important to track to understand the energy transition and the economics of that, including the wood price data. But I think beyond like the specific question of, what already exists versus what doesn't exist, there's also a benefit to being able to compile information that's kind of disparately available into one comprehensive picture. That's what we try to do in our annual progress report for the state, but this is much more, what is being proposed is much more focused on the economic transition and understanding that through a different number of lenses. And I think that pulling that together in a more comprehensive way certainly adds value.
Because I'm not seeing it anywhere, like in the rational places that you would go to look in state government.
My sense is that there's bits and pieces of this that exist in a number of different places, but that it's not together in one comprehensive, intelligible way right now.
Right. That's Matt.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, that's also my sense is that a lot of this data or something close to this data may exist, exactly that, but the kind of pulling it together and understanding how are Vermonters experiencing this, because I know that they're not experiencing it the same way, even just with our utilities, just with their different rate structures, different adoption, places where there's more dense population, you see more competition. So, how do we understand how this is, some folks are getting a lot more impressed.
Yeah. And if I may, I just want to offer, even though EAN is not a publicly funded organization, our funding comes from foundations and donations, philanthropic donations. We do our work to inform and ground Vermont's energy and climate conversation. So if, there are suggestions that you have for data tracking or analysis that we could do that would additionally be helpful, I know that may not end up in a bill, but we always want to hear that feedback, and however we can be a partner and a resource, we always want to do that.
And so all of the data that you're compiling, doing the hard work to compile in your dashboards and your reports could be made available to DPS right now as who we're envisioning.
Well, and oftentimes, the relationship goes both ways. So oftentimes we're requesting data from them that they're generously providing. And a lot of the utility that we provide is pulling things together in a more accessible and visually understandable format, rather than just being, in a spreadsheet somewhere. But oftentimes we'll be aware of a data resource from work that we're doing, with another organization or utility or agency that we can then share with another partner organization. But we've been really grateful to the Public Service Department for sharing data with us that ends up in this report. And I think, it's been a really collaborative and mutually beneficial relationship in terms of each being able to share data tracking resources with each other.
Okay.
Just as I usually do, express appreciation once again for this report and the ability to grab graphics, etc., from the report on your websites. I'm always looking for ways to help my constituents understand some of this data that's out there. And, as you said, you're presenting in a way that's accessible, which is really helpful. So thank you. And to your whole team here.
Yes, and on that note, if I may, including for the record, I want to recognize the amazing individual that is behind, who manages our data tracking, is Lena Steer, our data manager and research analyst. And I don't know if Lena was able to join on the Zoom or if she's just watching it live, but I did want to pause to see if she had anything to add. I am watching my text messages in case so, but if there are follow-up questions, Lena and I and Cara, our deputy director, will convene and see how we can be of further assistance. But want to thank Lena is the person who developed both the energy dashboard and our emissions tracking dashboard into what you saw today. And I was just the person presenting it to you. So.
All right. Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
And I just got a text from Lena saying, I'm watching the live stream on YouTube. Nothing to add.
Perfect timing. All right. Why don't we take a, Representative.
After Mr. Duval's done, I'd like to say something.
Sounds great. Let's stay on live then. And thank you so much for being here. All righty, Rep. Southworth.
So I need clarification. I read the bill as it's proposed. And it specifically states, bill proposes to require the Department of Public Service to report on economic impact. And then it goes down and it states that they'll do it in consultation with relevant state agencies. I'm feeling like we're going down a different path and we're broadening things. And if that's the case, then I think that we need to come back to this bill and either it gets redone and encompasses everything, or we just stick to what the bill actually is, because that's the discussion about the bill, Madam Chair. I just feel like we're getting bombarded with information that isn't relevant to the bill as the bill states.
So I can respond to that, and then maybe Rep. Sibilia can. So it's a great question, because it gets to sort of broader issues of just committee process. So a lot of times in the legislature, we'll start with a bill that is sort of bare bones, or it's an idea in legislative language, or it's one possible direction. And then we take all the relevant testimony we can think of, who might want to weigh in on this, what are their thoughts, who likes it, who doesn't like it, how can we expand or narrow the bill. And then after all of that testimony, we'll mark it up. And right now we've got testimony coming in on this bill all week. So we'll get a lot of different perspectives and thoughts, a lot of specific feedback. And then on Friday afternoon, during bill markup, what usually happens is that maybe the bill sponsor will join us as a group and legislative council, and we'll start talking through some of the testimony that we've heard, and we'll revise the draft. And so the language of the bill changes to reflect what we've heard in testimony, where we think the bill is going, whether we want to narrow it, whether we want to add specific points. And then we have basically an updated draft to look at. And a lot of times bills will go through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different drafts until they reflect all the testimony, until we feel that they fairly reflect all the testimony that we've heard. And we're having committee discussions as we go along until we get something that we think is ready to vote on.
Okay, just based on some of the testimony, I'm just trying to make the connection, because what it's stated in the bill, we're hearing testimony on stuff that's not in there. That's my confusion. And if we're not sticking to the script, so to speak, based on what's written, I fail to understand what it is that we're actually doing.
Rep. Sibilia, do you want to chime in? And then
So, broadly, so it's a pretty small bill, pretty small and simple bill for a pretty broad, question, how are Vermonters experiencing this? And, my sense was, rather than continuing to work on fleshing the language out myself, that I should keep it simple so that we could get it in here and have committee discussions. One of the pieces, and I can't remember when we were talking about this, that there was committee discussion about was goals and or a bit more on the outcome. So I actually started thinking about that and writing some language around that I've been sharing with the chair, which at some point we could share with the committee and see what the committee thinks about, or if they want to change that. So this is a normal kind of bill process for some bills. Some bills come in and they're like completely like, here it is. This is exactly, and we're just going to tweak a word or two. Some are
Rarely
struggling with a kind of bigger concept. So like if you have a short form bill that ends up, this is a little more than a short form.
So can I be frank?
sure, yeah, of course.
So DPS testified that they felt that the information was already available.
They are coming in to testify on this bill. Mark?
A&R, Secretary Moore.
No, I'm gonna take that back. That was a different one. Sorry, I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
But I just am struggling with seeing how we're going down different roads when I don't know. I feel like we're trying to expand from more than what the original ask was, I guess is what I'm saying.
May I?
But yeah, go ahead.
I would say we are. because the idea that I have presented and that Ledge Council has drafted is not, it's not, there's more knowledge and experience, including from you all around the table, but definitely from the administration that can be brought to bear. So this is not a bill that I worked on during the off session. Sometimes that happens. You collect all of that data before you're sitting in the room. That is not what we're doing here. Sometimes you do.
And we've, just as a part of our normal process, I and or Rep. Sibelia as the bill sponsor and or Jack, we've been sending this draft out to all the folks who are coming in to testify. Just saying, here's what we're thinking. You know, this is not quite a short form bill, but it was definitely a sketch. And here's what we're trying to accomplish. We really welcome your thoughts. And so that's why they're coming in, and you're feeling it expand or shift because we try to be really responsive to testimony. So the bills as introduced are not a fixed thing. I don't think I've ever voted on a bill that hasn't changed
I understand.
Yeah.
Change, but it seems like we're just kind of going off on tangents at points that I have a hard time just following tangents when this is what I read. And that's what I think we should be following. My opinion.
Yeah. I guess I'm interested in hearing from folks who would be a part of this work and getting their feedback and responding to what they have to say. Rep. Klebner?
You know, maybe a follow on to my question to Secretary Moore, and maybe a question for Representative Sibelia, for all of us. We are asking for a regular report. Let us track what's going on. And I'm interested in what we imagine the value of that is to us in terms of improved decision-making and improved action or actions. As I asked Secretary Moore, you know, what do we imagine we will do? I think that there's probably value beyond, oh, that's interesting, but it is not perfectly clear to me right now what that is.
Yeah, so I would, in responding to that, say, I think of government as a place that solves some really sticky, hard problems. And so what I envision this report to do is to kind of be like an alert, like, ooh, alert. There is, one gas station in a 60-mile, range in this. What do we do? I mean, that's not anything we like. The state doesn't run gas stations, but it's a problem there. And so, is it worth knowing about? Is it worth us thinking about? Is it worth the administration thinking about? So, kind of highlighting that issue. I would have liked for the issue with the phones to have been highlighted before my constituent, who only had one means of communicating, was told it would be 10 days, before her communication would be repaired.
Yeah.
Having a sense, and that took us an extraordinary effort and we're not done to build a response to that, so I'm seeing it as kind of a detection. And I would say just, as an example, and I'm hearing you, Representative Southworth. I thought it would be great to have EAN come in, because they do so much analysis with existing data, and I'm not sure. I don't think that we are asking for a lot of data to be collected. I think what we're asking for is the analysis of this. Are there problems, that emerge? And since they collect a lot of data, they could be really helpful in saying, you already have that, or you already have this analysis, or you don't need that, or we already do that. So that testimony was helpful to me in that regard, in terms of trying to understand what we have, what we don't have. And as someone who does a lot of data analysis on energy, what their thoughts might be, none of which we may want to include. But they do a lot of energy.
So it sounds as though what we are hoping as an energy committee with responsibility for overseeing Vermont's energy system and economy, and Vermonters' access there too, that what we are hoping for is to be able to, before a Vermonter loses access to transportation fuel or to heating fuel or to electricity, to have some forewarning of that.
Yeah.
Which we can then use to alert the administration, the appropriate part of the administration, that, hey, this 60-mile area is going to be without gasoline. You better rent a truck and plan to park it there 3 times a week so people can get gas, or whatever it is.
Yeah, where Fred's is the only fuel delivery left in the state of Vermont. And we're a little concerned about it, in
And,
a snow store.
and like best case scenario, by engaging, in my mind, like by engaging DPS in this and other state agencies in this work with us, Secretary Moore said a couple of things that were interesting to me when she was talking about the concept of like a food desert, which is that it would give us a policy basis to try to respond or be more proactive. Like, is this where you need a consumer protection bill, or is this where you need incentives, or is this where you need? Because I don't see this information being pulled together. It's all over the place right now.
And may I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So I do want to, I heard you say, Representative Klubner, that we oversee the energy economy, and we don't. There are some aspects of it that we regulate. We have a responsibility to Vermonters, just, around their ability to be safe, which would include heat, being able to get where they need to go to take care of their families. So it's a really tricky, we don't actually have oversight of the whole energy sector. I think perhaps you would push back on that.
Yep, and then I do want to allow time for a 5-minute break, or maybe you guys can keep talking and I will take a 5-minute break. We have our next witness at 3:00, but Rep. Daly?
Yeah, this report seems to me that we're still seeing it after the fact. I guess one of my questions is, if you've already seen this area in your neck of the woods, it's already becoming without street services.
So I've already seen gas stations in our more populated places go away. And I've heard from the fuel dealers themselves about consolidation within the industry for fuel sellers. And I think the point is a great one, Representative Bailey, and I think that's what we also heard from Secretary Moore. How can we think about this in advance and not behind? Maybe you're not saying the same thing.
Well, no, I'm just thinking maybe we need to see that report she's going to compile first before we actually see if we need to make a law. What they can pull together can answer your questions. Just baffled, I guess.
It gets back a little, sorry, Rep. Torrey?
No, you want to finish it?
I was just gonna say, gets back, I think we're on the same page with some of that, Rep. Bailey, because that gets back to the phase 1, phase 2 thing I was talking about. And can we see this first, the stuff you've got available along with your thoughts, and then maybe we'll try to flesh this out next year. But a lot of times we'll pass a pretty low impact, non-controversial bill saying, here's some stuff we'd like to see next fall. And there's really not much more in the bill than that. And it's just a little bit more, it'll set a debt, it'll say this is exactly what we want to see. It's due on November 15th. Here's who we think you'll work with. You told us you could do this, this, and that. That's great. And we pass a bill to make that happen. And it's really just, it's a formal request. Really, it's accountability instead of saying like, great, see you next September. So it is pretty common for the legislature to pass a, like I said, it's a report bill. And it just tells A&R exactly, or DPS, exactly what we're looking for. They've got it in writing, they've got a deadline, and that's that. Yeah,
Sorry.
right. Victoria?
I'll talk really fast, so we.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I find this a very useful exercise as a new committee. Especially if we can drill down to some questions, like what are the questions we want this data to help us answer?
Mhm.
Because as we think about those questions, it really will guide our work,
Yeah.
you know? And so let's work on that articulation together. And I think it'll be,
Maybe, Rep.
Good
Sibilia,
place.
can you send, I know it's drafty, but why don't you send out some of the framing stuff you've been working on to the full committee?
Sure.
Because we were thinking of incorporating it in our next draft, but I think that's not till Friday. I think it'd be helpful for folks to see it.
Thank
Okay.
you for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're doing. So if we could take a quick break